Hello, friends. Welcome to Type 56, the story of China's army. I'm not Jason Clower, but he is.
Friends, I have the honor to be here today with Ian McCollum at Forgotten Weapons Corps Headquarters. Friends, every country in every age has a gun that's an icon of its forces. It could be the Luger, the Webley, the 1911. In China, for a long time, that gun was the Mauser Broomhandle pistol. If you go to see a Chinese-made movie about any war from the fall of the Qing dynasty clear through the Korean War, if there's not a Broomhandle Mauser in it, you get your money back. That's except for the sand pebbles. For that, there's going to be a class action suit because there are no Mausers in it, and that's how you know that it was made by Hollywood and not Chinese people.
It does have a BAR in it.
That's respectable.
Not Chinese in any way, but...
If you've read Ian's book, Pistols of the Warlords, you know that fully half the firearms market for China before 1949 was consumed by the Broomhandle Mauser for very good reasons. Today we're going to talk about some of those. Now, if you go to China and you ask people, the Chinese version of Elmer Fudd at the gun club is going to tell you, well, the reason for that, foreign friend, is that during the warlord years, you Americans, 你们美国人, embargoed arms sales to China in a self-serving effort to quell the spread of fighting in China. And they will explain that under the terms of that embargo, Broomhandle Mausers were pistols, friends. And by the terms of that treaty, pistols were weapons of self-defense, not warfare. Thank you very much. And heaven knows that in China, in those decades, everybody needed a self-defense equalizer. China at that point had been bathed in more blood, but there's more to the story. One thing that you know if you've read Ian's book is that if that treaty was honored at all, it was more in the breach than the observance. China was full of warlords, each with his own army, each well-funded by money squeezed out of the peasantry, and much of it used to buy imported arms.
The warlords who could get the connections and the hard currency to do it, absolutely. Everyone knew the European and American guns were the best guns.
And I can't vouch for this personally, but people have told me that the Italians certainly brought in many Carcanos to China, and people have said that the Italian legation in Beijing would simply hand you a price sheet for the many Italian weapons that they had on offer. I can't vouch for that, the truth of that, but I'm also told that Germans would route arms that they weren't supposed to be able to export under the terms of the Treaty of Versailles through other countries and then have them transshipped to China.
I haven't dug much into the specifics. I've heard that obviously the same notion of, there was an arms embargo on China and that's why they got C-96 Mausers. I think there are elements of truth to that, but also elements of it's not really what people say because there were a lot of other guns getting imported into China. Some countries tried to maintain an embargo, I think as much because they were kind of trying to maintain their own quasi-colonial presences, the European districts in the port cities. The Japanese did a lot to restrict arms importation into China, both like a lot of the actual import agents were Chinese. A lot of foreign European companies would work with a Chinese agent who had a much better chance of speaking Chinese and being able to communicate with China than some Spanish or German who's a lot less likely to be fluent in Chinese. And when the Japanese really started encroaching into China, they diplomatically and militarily tried to shut down a lot of the arms importation.
And you made a point in your book that there were maybe reasons that this pistol was unusually well suited to combat in China then. Not just that it was available, but that it was particularly well suited, maybe?
It certainly could have been. The Chinese put the broom handles, and I say broom handle because they used a lot of C-96 Mausers, but they also used a lot of look-alike guns. This, for example, is a Spanish-made Bistigüe Hermanos that is not mechanically a C-96 Mauser, but it's very deliberately made to look exactly like a C-96 Mauser. And of course, a multitude of Chinese factories manufacturing both very good and very poor copies of the C96. At any rate, the Chinese used these pistols to a much greater extent than anybody else did. Like, they used the shoulder stocks as shoulder stocks. I feel like most of the time the shoulder stock gets used as a holster primarily.
Right.
But for the Chinese, that shoulder stock kind of turned the gun into a PDW. It was easy and fast to reload. It was compact. It was, because it was physically large as a pistol, it was seen as a powerful and imposing gun. It has sights that can shoot out to very far away. It had a life of its own in China.
And you taught me today that even though the 7.63 Mauser isn't really the ballistic peer of the 7.62 Tokarev, that it's still a formidable round.
It's definitely a potent cartridge. I don't want to get shot by that. No one else does either.
And you spurred me to think today that if I had been putting together a private army, I mean, I am, but if I had been doing this in the early part of the 20th century in China, if I had wanted options that were quicker shooting or better in, say, an assault than I could get in either a bolt-action rifle or whatever revolvers were available then, could I have done any better than something like this?
Well, I mean, in the global scope, yes. But I think in a way, submachine guns were conceptually popular, but not available in large numbers. And this kind of takes on the role of a submachine gun because, yeah, the vast majority, the bulk of what Chinese forces are armed with are bolt-action rifles. They're Mausers, they're Gewehr 88s, and copies thereof. And that's not fast shooting. You want semi-automatic firepower and eventually full auto. The Spanish first, and later the Germans with Mauser, made full auto versions of these pistols specifically for China. They ended up seeing some use in Europe as well, but they were made for the Chinese. That's where the demand was. That's a lot of firepower in a very compact package and very appealing from a military perspective.
Ian makes the point in his book that each warlord army would have an assault company of troops who were armed exclusively with broomhandle Mausers, or in some cases with a Mauser and a two-handed sword.
There's some wild pictures from the warlord era.
And from what I've read, during the warfare at the time, things would be pretty static and slow, and you would have your army composed mostly of dudes with pretty decent bolt-action rifles, but they were limited, of course, in how quickly they could fire. And so, whoever was ready to make a breakthrough would assemble a company or so of assault troops with these fast-firing Mausers and try to have them show up at a weak point in the enemy line where they wouldn't be expected and then blast their way through.
That makes a lot of sense to me. It would be easy to overwhelm, a specific, focus a bunch of guys with stocked semi-auto or even full auto pistols, PDWs basically. Focus a bunch of them on a position that's lightly defended by guys with bolt-action Mausers. Yeah, you're going to have a good chance of overrunning defenses and creating a big gap in the lines.
And your book also solved one of the questions that I had, which was, given that China in the 20s and 30s was such a advanced user of submachine guns, it's the only place that I know of in my limited knowledge that really embraced submachine guns between the world wars and developed them. Sadly, maybe didn't continue that development. But that made me wonder then, given that there were so many copies of the MP-18 floating around in China, why was that niche left open to the broomhandle Mauser? And in a piece that we were shooting a few moments ago, you finally made me realize by the time the submachine guns showed up after World War I, the market was saturated with how many broom handles?
In total, 350,000 German C96 Mausers are exported to China. It is fully 50% or so of Mauser's production of those pistols. Like, that gun stayed in production because the Chinese kept buying it.
So as we'll see in a future segment, There were still parts of the PLA where this was used in a very important and high profile way. One story that I'll tell you later involves a famous PLA martyr from the Revolution whose whole modus operandi was to sneak around with a small group of scouts, and then they would find a position, like a dwelling that was being occupied by enemy soldiers deep in the rear, the kind of place where a bunch of guys bursting in together, trying to clumsily wield big rifles or, heaven forbid, shoot through one enemy only to hit their buddy in back with a big rifle bullet. In a situation where that would be dangerous, this guy would put his men into hiding and he would load up his big 20-round extra big broom handle, what they called I think it was called the 大肚盒子, the big belly box pistol. And he would burst in there all by himself and plug every man jack of the enemy.
It's the CQB weapon of the 1920s. Like,
Exactly.
legitimately. Yeah. By the way, the 20 they made detachable box magazine versions of the C96. They also made extended fixed magazines. They did make a 20-round fixed mag broom handle. Like, the magazine comes down a little lower than the grip, and the shoulder stock for it was bigger as well to accommodate this gigantic magazine. We've actually got pictures of one in the book. It's huge, big belly box cannon, like perfect description of that thing.
I also learned that not only was China an early adopter of the chest rig concept, but also of, I don't even know what this is called, but I see them nowadays on police body armor where the handgun is put on the outside.
Oh, really?
Sort of like sort of like an appendix position, but more like on his sternum.
Yeah, but on the outside of the... I didn't know that was in use in China.
I've seen janky homemade ones that seem like they were bent out of sheet metal into a sort of like a really uncomfortable outside the waistband cross draw appendix holster for your Mauser that you would carry right there for a quick draw while still carrying the big box stock on your hip. So that if you needed to, you could sort of blast your way to safety and then get behind cover and fix your stock to continue the fight.
That's pretty cool. I did not know about that.
Speaking of stocks, Ian has a stock for one of the broom handles, which makes it one of the few that I know about in existence.
No, a lot of stocks are available. Those are not particularly uncommon. The one I have is a weird one because I'm not sure exactly what pistol it attaches to because it doesn't actually fit my actual broom handle or my Bastigui. But no, it's not that hard to find stocks. They've also made reproduction runs of stocks. So now short barrel rifle rules have flip-flopped a number of times. I believe the current standing in the U.S. is that a C96 made, like an original C96, can have an original stock attached and will not be an SBR, but a reproduction stock is. And if you have like a post-World War II Chinese-made gun, like one of the late production Shansei, I feel embarrassed about my Chinese pronunciation in company here. The late production 45 caliber broom handles can't have stocks without becoming short-barreled rifles. That's a weird mess of a legal nuanced situation. But I think maybe one thing that's worth adding in here is like the question of why the broom handle as an assault weapon, so to speak, and not other pistols. And I think a big part of that is the use of stripper clips. Because when we look at the Warlord era pistols, they didn't have spare magazines typically. Like, you might be lucky and have a second magazine, but most of these things were made with one hand-fitted magazine. You have the gun, you have the magazine. And so you've got a capacity of 6 to 9 rounds maybe. And then it's reload the mag. And this is fairly typical of European armies at the same time. When an officer gets issued his sidearm, he doesn't have a bandolier of spare magazines with it. And it's hard to be a really good assault element with 8 rounds. But with the broom handles, you can have lots of stripper clips. Like the ammunition comes from the factory packaged on stripper clips. And so you can get your chest rig bandolier of 100 rounds on stripper clips. When the gun's empty, it locks open, whoop, run a new clip in. It's never whoop, it's way more finicky than that. But this is one of the few guns that's actually feasible for a level of sustained fire that you need for that sort of submachine gun-like utilization.
And if you need a secondary weapon, that's why you have a saber, friends.
What? No. No. What do you mean? No, I want more ammunition.
This is China. You can't have ammunition.
Oh, crap.
You already got 10 rounds. That's a 1-year supply.
Yeah.
One day, friends, I have a dream that I will run an IDPA stage with a broom handle and a sword, where your job will be to engage one target and then cleave the other one from head to groin.
I've seen those swords. Like, that seems not that difficult.
Until that day comes, friends, I remain your Jason Clower here at Type 56, The Story of China's Army. Ian, if people would like to read your fine book, where can they find it?
They can find this at headstamppublishing.com. We have regular and author signed, that would be me, signed copies of it, as well as a whole bunch of other books that we've published on a variety of cool gun subjects.
And I happen to know that you have a book coming up shortly on Kickstarter concerning finished weapons, which I have always felt bear a strong kinship to Chinese ones.
Oh, fantastic.
When might we be able to learn more?
The plan is that will be live in November on Kickstarter. I'm very excited about it. I am deep into working on that book right now.
I'm excited too, so much that I've already started writing my review of it in my head, which probably is the wrong order of operations.
That does suggest some level of perhaps bias.
Friends, coming to you from the command post at Forgotten Weapons with Ian McCollum, I am Jason Clower. This is Type 56, The Story of China's Army. I can't wait to talk to you next time. Thank you.